This morning, the Finance Committee meets to discuss President Biden's nomination of Chief Chris Magnus to lead Customs and Border Protection. I want to thank Chief Magnus for joining the committee today and for his willingness to take on this extraordinarily difficult job. Chief Magnus is the Chief of Police in Tucson, Arizona. He started out in Lansing, Michigan, and his career in public safety has taken him east, west, north, and south. If confirmed, Chief Magnus would lead an agency with tens of thousands of employees. Customs and Border Patrol is responsible for over 300 points of entry into the country, and it enforces the country's immigration laws. The committee has a special interest in ensuring that Customs and Border Patrol's trade mission does not get short shrift. Enforcing trade laws vigorously and working to stay ahead of trade cheats is absolutely key to protecting jobs, businesses, and innovations in America, and Customs and Border Patrol is right at the heart of that challenge. Too often in the past, including during the Trump administration, trade enforcement has been a secondary issue. The committee has worked hard over the last few years to give Customs and Border Patrol fresh and modern trade enforcement tools. The goal is to help our trade enforcers work faster and communicate more closely with businesses and other organizations that can spot the trade cheats. And these trade cheats are definitely undercutting American workers, and they're undercutting American jobs. Those upgrades have already begun to make a big difference over the slower, outdated approach of previous decades. In my view, we all understand there is room for improvement, so this committee is going to continue to look for ways, and I've discussed this with the chief, to strengthen our trade enforcement even further. One such issue that's posing a serious danger to America's values and our jobs is the use of forced labor in China and elsewhere. It is an abhorrent practice, modern-day slavery. The Finance Committee's authority over trade laws is a big part of what needs to be an all-out effort to end that modern-day slavery. Until just a few years ago, there had been a major loophole in the laws on the books that allowed some products made by forced labor to be imported to the country. Senator Brown and I wrote the law that closed that loophole in 2016. Since then, for example, the United States has taken action to block the import of cotton and tomatoes picked by slave labor in Western China. However, there are many more areas and industries in which forced labor continues to be an ongoing threat to American workers. In addition to goods coming from China, Senator Brown and I are concerned about the import of mica, palm oil, and cocoa, which may also be produced with forced labor. Customs and Border Patrol not only investigates allegation of forced labor and demands remediation where appropriate, it also enforces the ban on forced labor products entering the country. This is a hard job, and once again, it requires quick action, lots of discussion and communication in an ongoing way with American businesses, human rights organizations, and others. This committee is going to continue to work on this issue in the months and years ahead, and we look forward to hearing from Chief Magnus on that subject today. Finally, immigration is not explicitly in the Finance Committee's jurisdiction. It is sure, however, to come up today from members. The Trump administration made it fashionable to believe that enforcing our immigration laws required abusing immigrants and asylum seekers at the border. Recently, the American people saw images of what that mindset looks like in the real world. It is absolutely, unquestionably wrong. I start this proposition, and you and I have talked about this, Chief, with the proposition that enforcing our immigration laws and treating people humanely, those two goals are not mutually exclusive. We can do both, and we're going to insist on both. Embracing immigration and asylum seekers is not only a part of our national character, it's a big economic winner for America. And I appreciate the discussions we had on that matter. Close with one last point on an issue that dates back to before Chief Magnus's nomination. In the summer of 2020, the Trump administration deployed federal law enforcement troops in cities, including my hometown of Portland. As the chief knows, I was hearing from schools like the Cottonwood School in Portland, where they got up in the morning and they saw tear gas canisters in their sandbox. And clearly, there were some major abuses of power at that time. For many months, I demanded review of policies regarding, for example, the use of chemical munitions at schools. there now has been significant progress on these issues. I want to thank the Secretary Mayorkas, for that progress, and I look forward to working with the Secretary and the Department on this subject, because some of my neighbors in Portland are still reeling from the harm that the Trump administration inflicted on them. With that, Chief, I want to congratulate you again on your nomination. Thank you for being here. We're going to have a good discussion today. My friend, Senator Crapo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Magnus, welcome. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, is the nation's largest federal law enforcement agency. It needs to be. Its responsibilities are staggering. CBP is tasked with facilitating lawful international trade and travel. The United States is a leader in international commerce, and that leadership depends on ensuring that lawful trade and visits flow smoothly. It also requires that we safeguard our borders from terrorists, drug traffickers, and transnational criminals. In 2020, a year where the pandemic curtailed trade and travel, the 63,000 men and women of CBP on an average day processed 650,000 passengers and 77,000 truck, rail, and sea containers, arrested 39 criminals at U.S. ports of entry, seized 3,600 pounds of drugs, caught $3.6 million worth of products that infringe intellectual property rights, and discovered 250 pests that could potentially cause untold damage to U.S. farmers. But CBP's work is not just point-of-entry inspections. CBP also undertakes sophisticated investigations to ensure our customs laws are properly enforced. This includes identifying actors who try to smuggle goods made with forced labor into the United States or evade our anti-dumping or countervailing duties. Deliberate evasion of anti-dumping and countervailing duties not only undercuts revenue lawfully owed to the government, but prevents our workers and businesses from redressing unfair trade practices. Softwood lumber producers in my home state of Idaho rely on anti-dumping and countervailing measures to combat unfair trade, and CBP's work ensures that those measures are effective. CBP also maintains international operations. CBP operates attaché offices in 23 countries around the world. Its Container Security Initiative screens containers that pose a risk of terrorism at foreign ports before they are placed on vessels destined for the United States. Through this program, CBP can pre-screen over 80% of all maritime containerized cargo into the United States. Under normal circumstances, overseeing all this work would require extraordinary skill, experience, and judgment. But these are not normal times. Specifically, I'm referring to the heartbreaking situation unfolding on our southern border. In August of this year, CBP had over 200,000 encounters on the southwest border, significantly higher than the preceding August that had only 50,000 encounters, which itself was down from 60,000 in August of 2019. In fiscal year 2021, there were 1.4 million encounters, even without accounting for September numbers that are not yet known, which is more than double the 458,000 encounters in fiscal year 2020. Once in office, the administration's initial approach to this surge was to downplay, or worse, undermine its own tools to address it. It eliminated the successful Remain in Mexico policy known as the Migrant Protection Protocols. This program wisely required certain migrants to remain in Mexico while their claims were decided. The sudden termination of the program was not only rash, but, as confirmed by the Supreme Court in August, contrary to law. Moreover, the men and women of CBP have been left demoralized and adrift by the administration's approach. Indeed, the president of the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association has written that the administration needs to stop blaming the federal law enforcement officers at the border, who are overtasked, under-resourced, and underappreciated. It is the lack of a coherent strategy that has escalated the crisis at the border, not the border officers, end quote. In sum, the crisis, and that is precisely what it is absolutely unacceptable. This committee must ensure that CBP is headed by someone who has the requisite ability and commitment to end it as soon as possible. Failing to ensure such, will only prolong this tragedy. Accordingly, I look forward to this hearing and the nominee's testimony and his response to our questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Crapo, and as always, I look forward to working with you. Senator Sinema is here. Senator Kelly is here. Chief, you have the good fortune to be supported strongly by both of your United States senators. We welcome their remarks. We'll begin with Senator Sinema.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to attend today's Finance Committee hearing and introduce Chief Chris Magnus, an exceptional nominee to be Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by my friend and colleague, Senator Mark Kelly, who will also offer introductory comments. Chris Magnus has been a police chief in Fargo, North Dakota, Richmond, California, and currently my hometown of Tucson, Arizona, and that's where I've gotten to know him. His background as an exceptional law enforcement professional on both the northern and southwestern borders has prepared him well to help CBP overcome and meet the challenges at our borders. When I judge a border initiative or solution, I examine three main questions. 1, will this provision help secure the border? 2, will it protect our communities? And 3, will it ensure that migrants are treated fairly and humanely? I know that Chris Magnus will have a similar approach, and that's why he has my support, and it's why I hope he will have the support of this committee and the Senate as well. As we all know, there have been significant problems along the border in the past years. During that time, the city of Tucson has been on the front lines of responding to and managing the ongoing migrant crisis. Tucson city officials and NGOs have teamed up with the Department of Homeland Security to manage high numbers of asylum seekers and other migrants arriving in Arizona. This has been a successful partnership that has helped both migrants and has protected our communities. Chief Magnus's role in this partnership shows that he understands the current issues at our borders. He collaborates effectively with various stakeholders to tackle complicated problems, and he's ready to get to work to solve these issues. Chief Magnus also understands that we need to secure the border. This is a law enforcement challenge that starts at our ports of entry, which is where most of the narcotics that cross the southwest border enter our nation. CBP needs a commissioner who understands how to thwart organized criminal networks while also allowing for the efficient flow of legitimate trade and travel. Arizona, and particularly Tucson, is a critical link in the flow of cross-border commerce along the southwest border. Chief Magnus has built great relationships through Arizona, and I am certain he'll bring that same consensus-building, common-sense approach to CBP. And that's what we need at the border right now. Our nation faces significant challenges at the border, but the only way we can solve them is by working together. And Chief Magnus has shown the tenacity and the ability to do exactly that at every step of his career, as he's moved up from a police officer in Michigan to a police chief in Arizona. And I have no doubt that he will step up again when he is confirmed as Commissioner of CBP. It's critical that the Customs and Border Patrol have a Senate-confirmed leadership position. Today's hearing is an important step towards that goal, a goal that I hope each of us as senators share. Having someone like Chief Magnus leading CBP is the best way our nation can better secure our border, better protect our communities, and ensure that migrants are treated fairly and humanely. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you again for the opportunity to speak to the committee today.
Thank you, Senator Sinema. Chief, you have the support of 100% of Arizona's United States senators, and we'll hear from the other one. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of the committee, thank you for holding this hearing. Happy to be here today with Senator Sinema to introduce Tucson Police Chief Chris Magnus, who has been nominated to be the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection. As a Southern Arizonan, Chris Magnus knows well the importance of this critical post. Arizona shares a 373-mile-long border with Mexico, and Arizonans know that too often Washington is far removed from this reality, trying to secure the border and fix our broken immigration laws without knowing what's happening on the ground. Washington has failed Arizonans on this issue for decades, and it's eroded trust in the system. That's why we welcome the nomination of Chief Magnus, a Tucsonan and longtime law enforcement leader, to head Customs and Border Protection. Because we need a smart approach at the border that is humane, orderly, and secure. And we need someone at the helm with the experience and perspective to implement those smart solutions. And as we continue to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic and work to rebuild our economy, it's critical that our trade and tourism economies recover as well. We need a leader at CBP who can undertake the task of ensuring we have the resources, training, and capacity at our borders to process increased tourism and cargo, which our border communities and businesses depend on. And finally, CBP officers have a difficult job. They are often stretched thin and asked to work long hours in difficult conditions. I appreciate their service. It is critical for Arizona and for CBP to have Senate-confirmed leadership committed to supporting officers and carrying out its mission. Over his 42-year career in law enforcement, Chief Magnus served as the chief of police in 3 separate police departments across the country. As the son of 2 police officers myself, I have respected his approach to public service and his leadership at the Tucson Police Department. It's clear that he values establishing meaningful connections with folks he works with and serves, regardless of their backgrounds. He has done this in Tucson, working with and earning the respect of leaders of different political parties and from different parts of the community. In southern Arizona, we have gotten to know Chief Magnus as a committed public servant with the grit and experience to take on this job. I know that through this confirmation process, this committee and the Senate will see that as well. And when he's confirmed, we in Arizona look forward to continuing to work with him to secure our border and support the men and women of CBP. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. And I know both of my colleagues have busy days, so you can consider yourself excused. And thank you very much for being here to launch Mr. Magnus's nomination hearing. Chief, we'll now hear from you. Then we have some obligatory questions that we're going to have to ask, but please go ahead. And I very much appreciated the conversation that we recently had and look forward to your remarks.
Chairman Wyden, Member Crapo, and members of the committee, it really is an honor and privilege to be sitting before you today as President Biden's nominee to serve as Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection. I am very grateful for the support of the President and Secretary Mayorkas. Originally created in 1789 in order to pay our country's Revolutionary War debts, CBP's modern-day responsibilities, facilitating immigration, protecting our nation's border security, promoting trade and travel, and more, are as critical now as they were in the early days following our nation's founding. CBP is a key part of our immigration system that has welcomed so many families to our country, including my own. My father was an English and art history professor who immigrated to the U.S. from Norway in 1921. My mother, a pianist and a homemaker, was the daughter of German immigrants. I have 2 sisters, Carol and Beth, and a brother, Gerhard. My husband, Terrence Chung, who is with me today, immigrated to the United States from Hong Kong with his wonderful mother, Clara, who has retired after running her own small business for 3 decades. Terrence has been a journalist, chief of staff for a mayor and county supervisor, and currently works for the Arizona Superior Court in Pima County. I could not ask for a more supportive partner. As a career public safety officer, there would be no greater privilege than to lead one of the largest federal law enforcement agencies in the country. As a young man in Lansing, Michigan, I put myself through college, where I earned degrees in criminal justice and labor relations from Michigan State University. I worked first as a 911 dispatcher, a paramedic, and a deputy sheriff. I then came up through the Lansing Police Department ranks, ultimately attaining the rank of captain. My 41-year career in public safety has afforded me the opportunity to work in communities of all sizes and types in different geographic areas of the country, each with its own unique needs and challenges, and all of them provided opportunities to learn, innovate, and work with talented, dedicated people. But I know all too well the impact that trade and its economic effects can have on America's communities. As a police officer in Lansing, Michigan, I saw firsthand what happened when the U.S. auto industry struggled during the 80s and 90s. Today, thanks to bipartisan efforts to improve our trade policies, auto plants in Lansing and other American cities not only do business on a level playing field, but have also been able to expand and flourish. Manufacturing workers throughout the U.S. can now be assured of more pay equity with Mexican and Canadian workers. I am acutely aware that CBP's role in enforcing trade laws and facilitating trade goes well beyond the manufacturing sector. If confirmed to lead this agency, I will work with this committee and with Congress to protect intellectual property, U.S. agriculture, and the many products that Americans rely on. Addressing forced labor would also be one of my high priorities. While it's hard to imagine anything more antithetical to our core values as Americans, eliminating forced labor is more than a philosophical undertaking. It is a moral imperative. We must give full force to laws that punish this modern-day slavery, while simultaneously facilitating trade for the overwhelming majority of companies who do business responsibly. Today, I live in a city close to the U.S. border with Mexico and consider myself lucky to have visited both borders many times. It's essential to recognize that what we think of as the border is not homogeneous, and there's no one solution that will provide us with perfect border security. So if confirmed, I will do what I've always done in my professional career, which is to uphold the law. I will expect without exception that all agency personnel be conscientious, fair, and humane when enforcing the law. Now, more than a few colleagues, friends, and family members have asked me, what are you thinking? Why would I choose to take on this important but challenging responsibility of leading CBP at this moment? And here's my answer, which is the same answer I gave when I started my public safety career in 1979. I want to make a difference. CBP is a proud agency with a mission that is vital to this country. I believe that by working with Congress, the men and women who serve CBP and its public and private sector partners, that we can build upon its many strengths to make the agency even better. I pride myself on being a pragmatic and bipartisan problem solver, and the principles that have guided me are integrity, accountability, caring, and resolve. I care about innovative ideas, not ideology. I prize and foster continuous improvement, and then I dig in to get the work done. So if confirmed, my pledge to this committee and its members is simple. I will have an unwavering commitment to serving the American people and will lead with intellectual humility and enthusiasm every day. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today and for your consideration of my nomination to this critical role, and I look forward to your questions.
Chief, thank you very much. I heard you say that your friends asked you, what were you thinking when you decided to be the president's nominee? And I said to myself, I hope he doesn't shut his binder and walk out, because we're very glad that you're here. Now, we've got some obligatory questions. First, is there anything that you're aware of in your background that might present a conflict of interest with the duties of the office to which you've been nominated?
No, there's not.
Second, do you know of any reason, personal or otherwise, that would in any way prevent you from fully and honorably discharging the responsibilities of the office to which you've been nominated?
No, there is not.
Third, do you agree without reservation to respond to any reasonable summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the Congress if you are confirmed?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do.
Finally, do you commit to provide a prompt response in writing to any questions addressed to you by any senator of the committee?
Yes, I do.
All right. I'll begin with just a couple of questions and then yield to my colleague, Senator Crapo. Now, you have a significant enforcement role, particularly on the southern border, the ports of entry, and you have a big challenge from a humanitarian standpoint, given what's happened in countries in the Western Hemisphere. We all have seen the images of the Border Patrol agents expelling the Haitian migrants at the border, and nothing about those images is acceptable or appropriate. Now, during my visit to the southern border, I saw, and we talked about this, Border Patrol agents unable to interpret the immigration laws on the books correctly. So my question to you is, how are you going to go about making sure that the agents understand the immigration and refugee laws that are on the books, and number two, that they act humanely when enforcing them?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the question. I agree that Border Patrol agents, and for that matter, all members of CBP, have significant enforcement roles, and that has to be a balance always of law enforcement, but also treating people with humanity. That is exactly what I expect of my own officers and have wherever I've worked. But I also think that training has to go all the way back to the academy level where people first start. In fact, I think you can make a credible case that it goes all the way back to the traits and characteristics that you look for in the people that you hire. If I was fortunate to be confirmed to this position, I would want to look all the way back to that stage to make sure we are looking for people who have the right qualities and skills to be the best possible members of CBP, that they receive the necessary training to do their jobs, and then the necessary supervision to help them move forward with that. That is exactly the approach that I've always taken.
I just want you to know that we're going to be following up in this area because, as I touched on earlier, I don't believe that enforcement of these laws and treating people humanely is mutually exclusive. We're going to have to insist on both, and we'll have further discussions about it. Let's talk about the supply chain situation, the backlog, enormous problems for American businesses, raising costs for our consumers, long waits, for example, CBP X-ray machines, and the Biden administration has engaged in a public-private partnership now to keep U.S. ports open 24/7 to address shipping issues. We want to ask specifically about your role in this because it's clear to me that you're not going to be in a position to deal with all aspects of the supply chain backlog, but improved processing of shipments through ports is clearly part of your portfolio. That's where, in effect, you're the point person, improving processing of shipments through ports, part of your portfolio. How would you go about carrying that out?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question, and I could not agree more that preserving and reinforcing America's supply chain is one of our top priorities and must be one of our top priorities, certainly something that I care deeply about. We've seen, as we approach the holidays, the impact of a supply chain that's struggling right now. And so although CBP is only one actor at the ports and certainly not the only entity that has responsibility for the smooth movement of goods through the ports, it plays a very important role. I would want to make sure, if confirmed, that the agency has the appropriate staffing at the ports, that we are working with the President's guidance around hours and different ways that the ports are operational. I also believe that continuing to develop and modernize the resources that CBP has, such as ACE, I think, very important as we move forward. There's definitely work to be done to maintain that, to modernize it, to get it into the cloud. All of these things will help us, some both in the short run and in the long run, but all very important.
One last question we can do quickly. I want to talk to you about e-passport security. As you know, the General Accounting Office identified a major security gap at the border. Customs and Border Patrol lacked the software necessary to verify that the data stored in passport chips hadn't been tampered with or forged. The agency initially ignored the report. Then we started putting pressure on the agency well before your time, urging the agency to address this vulnerability, and the agency began a pilot of the necessary software. Unfortunately, that software license lapsed after the pilot ended. Now there's no fix on the border. Will you commit this morning to working with us to address the GAO findings and provide Customs and Border Patrol agents with the necessary tools to spot high-tech, forged passports that are being used by spies and criminals?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. And isn't it a source of frustration in so many of our organizations? I know I've dealt with this over and over again, where good pilot programs just sort of seem to somehow never be put into full force or appropriately implemented. What you've described is a system that makes imminent sense. It is absolutely something that I would pledge to complete, because I think we need this as part of our national security.
My time is up. Let's you and I talk about a specific timetable for it, because I think this is a tool that increasingly will be used by people like spies, criminals, and people who threaten our country. We've got to get it online. Senator Crapo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Magnus, Senator Wyden's question on the supply chain and ports was actually my first question, too, so I appreciate his raising it and your answer to it. I'm going to move on to some immigration enforcement issues. One of President Biden's first actions upon taking office was to inexplicably announce a 100-day moratorium on deportations, including on individuals subject to a final order of removal. A federal court quickly issued a preliminary injunction finding that this was acting inconsistently with our immigration law. Although the Biden administration subsequently agreed to let the moratorium lapse, the precedent is deeply troubling. If the president doesn't like the law, he needs to work with Congress. And my question to you is, will you commit to enforce our immigration law at the border, including using all of the resources available to CBP?
Ranking Member Crapo, thank you for that question. And I agree, we have some significant challenges at the border. The numbers are very high, and it is something that has to be addressed. Clearly, we have a broken system. So, yes, Senator, I will commit to enforcing the law.
Thank you very much. And again, at the border, the CBP does not routinely test migrants for COVID prior to their release into the United States. Officials in the city of McAllen, Texas, have said that more than 7,000 out of the nearly 88,000 migrants released by CBP into the city since February have tested positive for COVID-19. Do you think we should test migrants for COVID-19 before releasing them into the cities?
Senator, yes, I absolutely do. And in fact, I appreciate where you're coming from with this question, because as a chief in Tucson, we've also experienced similar challenges, and it puts a great deal of pressure on not only our NGOs, but on the really dedicated men and women of the Border Patrol and, for that matter, ICE, who have to interact with these folks. So it's a humanitarian matter, but it's also a public health matter, and I would totally commit to that.
Thank you. Next, just 2 weeks ago, CBP deployed what's called simplified arrival at the pedestrian border crossings in Sweetgrass and Eastport, Idaho. Simplified arrival allows biometric facial technology to replace document checks that are normally used for admission into the United States. It's good that we're seeing more of this technology for arrivals of our visitors, but what about when our visitors exit? A major source of illegal immigration is visa overstays. Should we deploy biometric tools for when visitors exit the United States? And if so, do you see this as a priority issue?
Senator, thank you for that question. The issue of biometrics really holds a great deal of potential throughout law enforcement. It is something that has to be put into place with caution, understandably, because there are always concerns about how this data is stored, for how long, the manner in which it is used. But if confirmed, this is something that I want to pursue further, look into more carefully, and I'd like to work with you on and others who are interested in this issue.
Well, thank you very much. And as I indicated, Senator Wyden covered my supply chain issues, so I will stop there, and we will go to the next senator, which is Senator Stabenow, who I believe is with us virtually on the web. Senator Stabenow.
To you and Chairman Wyden for this really important hearing, and welcome, Chief Magnus. It's good to see you again, and I appreciated our chance to talk not only about the job for which you are before us on, but also about growing up in Michigan. So I appreciate the fact that Lansing, where I live, was your birthplace. So welcome. It's nice to see you. You have a very challenging task ahead of you, obviously. So many ways in which you impact our economy, our people, our safety. It's a very, very important position. And if confirmed, you will certainly have a lot on your plate. You'll be responsible for the smooth facilitation of international trade and the enforcement of our trade laws to ensure that our workers and businesses compete on a level playing field. Also be involved, of course, in efforts with the administration to repair our broken immigration system and create more fair and humane treatment of asylum seekers and immigrants. I want to first start with something very specific to Michigan. As you know, we have the largest northern border crossing from Detroit into Canada. We have actually two of the top, the Ambassador Bridge in Detroit and the Blue Water Bridge in Port Huron. And as you know, construction is underway for a second international crossing in Detroit, the Gordie Howe International Bridge, which is expected to be done in 2024. The Blue Water Bridge in Port Huron is in the middle of a project to expand their customs plaza, which frankly has taken way too long. There's been too many stops and starts on this project. It's been extremely frustrating for the community, and it's essential for the community that this project is completed as quickly as possible. And CBP's support will be absolutely critical to get that done. So if confirmed, will you commit to working with our local communities in Detroit and Port Huron and working with my office to ensure that these projects continue to move forward?
Senator, thank you for the question. And as we discussed, I think you appreciate my concern for these ports of entries and the very important role that CBP plays in managing them. I know that these ports of entry are vital to our American workers, to our American businesses. So if confirmed, I would absolutely want to visit the Blue Water Bridge port, but there'd be a number of other ports that I'd want to visit as well.
Thank you. Well, we would welcome you. Let me take my remaining time and put on my agriculture, nutrition, and forestry hat as chairing the committee, because CBP plays a critical role in protecting farmers and consumers and the environment from invasive pests and diseases, working closely with the Department of Agriculture's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. And I know in Michigan alone, agriculture is our second largest industry, and producers are facing increased threats every day, from cherry growers grappling with damage caused by the spotted wing Drosophila Drosophila, I always get that wrong, to pork producers threatened by African swine fever, which was found in the atmosphere for the first time in decades, to emerald ash borer that has devastated our forests. If confirmed, will you commit to be a strong partner with the USDA to help protect our producers? And in a related point, let me just say that Senator Peters, Cornyn, Roberts, and I have worked to secure passage of a bill that was signed into law early last year to address an ongoing shortage of inspectors, agriculture inspectors in canine units. And I'm wondering what your strategy would be to ensure we have enough agriculture specialists monitoring these challenges.
Senator, thank you for the question, and I'm grateful I did not have to pronounce that term that you were referring to. Yes, I appreciate the importance of the USDA inspectors and the critical role that they play working with other CBP personnel. So ensuring that there is sufficient staffing of those personnel and really that their role is appreciated. I don't think it's fully understood by as many people as it needs to be. So this is something I'd want to work with you and others on.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And next we'll go to Senator Grassley.
My questions are relevant to someone who has been nominated for a senior leadership position within an agency tasked with securing our border and enforcing our immigration laws. Do you believe that illegally crossing the border between ports of entry should remain a crime under federal law?
Senator, I do.
Do you agree that sanctuary jurisdictions, meaning localities that refuse to comply with ICE detainer requests, are an impediment to enforcing federal immigration law?
Senator, I think it's very important that local communities do work with federal agencies that include ICE and the Border Patrol, and I appreciate your question. I think there have been some legitimate issues raised about the risk that communities may be in when they are enforcing detainers as opposed to making arrests. We have been advised in several of the communities I worked in that by our legal advisors and city attorneys that we should have an arrest warrant to be holding individuals for ICE.
What are your views on the notice to report process that has been implemented by CBP in recent months?
Senator, I appreciate the question, and obviously the better practice would be to have individuals be noticed to appear as opposed to notice to report. I understand that because we have not had enough asylum officers or immigration judges, and that's not just recently, that's been really over the past 4 years, and also because we have some very long waits for people to come before a proceeding, we have a real challenge on our hands. And so I think this is something that Congress is going to play a very important role in helping to fix, but I think this is definitely what we have now, a broken system.
On a legal point on the same matter, what, in your view, is a statutory basis for notice to report process?
Senator, thank you for the question, and that's something that I'm not knowledgeable about at this time, but that I would want to learn more about. I can tell you this, however, if confirmed, I believe our primary role has to be to enforce the law, and I would make that commitment to you.
Since you felt you weren't able to answer that question because of not maybe knowing the basis of it, would you respond to that question in writing then about Senator, the statutory basis for notice to report?
Senator, I'd be happy to do that.
Do you believe that it's necessary to maintain the Title 42 public health expulsion order at the border, particularly since about 15% of the people crossing the border are positive?
Senator, as I think I indicated in my opening statement, as a paramedic for 10 years, public health has always been one of my top concerns. And because of that, I think it's absolutely imperative that we do everything possible to stop the spread of COVID. And Title 42 is a CDC authority, and it helps. I think it helps with this. CBP certainly has a responsibility with implementing this policy. But here's the bottom line, Senator. I will always comply with the law, even as it changes, perhaps, regarding Title 42, no matter what it is that the courts decide.
What are your views on the scope of the humanitarian exceptions to Title 42 expulsion orders and the extent to which they should be utilized?
Senator, I appreciate the question, but again, this is an area that I think coming in from the outside, I would need to learn more about. I'm not aware of as much information as I'd like to be in order to answer that question at this time.
Okay. My last question will have to be this. At the time you, in regard to the Portland, Oregon attack on the federal courthouse, you issued a tweet in the New York Times that said, quote, "This activity, I won't even dignify it by calling it policing, is an affront to constitutional professional law enforcement," end of quote. You then questioned the officers not having visible patches or name tags, using unmarked vehicles. Was it wrong for the federal government to send its officers to protect the Portland federal courthouse in July 2020?
Senator, thank you for the question. And I think this really comes down to an issue of, was the governor of the state of Oregon and was the mayor of Portland involved in this decision? I think that's very important, especially given the fact that any federal law enforcement would need to, in order to be effective, really, and to be seen as legitimate, would need to work with state and local law enforcement. I do, as a police chief of over 21 years, have significant problems with the idea that police officers would be out there in any sort of patrol or other contact with the public without having visible patches or badges. I think that is a serious problem, and it is one that I couldn't endorse.
Thank you very much.
Time of my colleagues expired. Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Magnus. I was deeply concerned by the inhumane treatment of Haitian migrants at the border and the substandard conditions in the Del Rio encampment. If confirmed, will you commit to providing members of Congress with regular updates on the status and well-being of migrants encountered at the border?
Senator, thank you for the question. And like you, I found those images troubling, but I also believe, and I've certainly learned this over my career in policing, that a full and thorough investigation is necessary before any final conclusions are drawn. That said, I would totally support keeping this committee, any member of the Senate, abreast of the progress associated with the investigation.
DHS officials reported that multiple agency failures, including a failure to share important intelligence, left U.S. immigration officials unprepared to adequately respond to the large influx of Haitian migrants that arrived in Del Rio in September. If confirmed, what will you do in your role as commissioner to address these operational missteps?
Senator, thanks for that question. I think we can always do better. And I think part of doing better means that we take a thorough and really thoughtful look back at how a situation was handled, what we can learn from it, what we want to do, perhaps being more prepared, working with other federal agencies, working with state and local agencies, including our NGOs, looking at how we anticipate surges coming across the border. These are all things that I think we can plan for better going forward, and is something that I would commit to doing to the best of my ability.
Well, one of the things I hope you'll do upon your confirmation is work to make sure we have a seamless, horizon of intelligence so that we at least know what we are facing and can prepare for it. And in that regard, DHS officials are reportedly tracking several additional groups of Haitian migrants, including more than 20,000 migrants currently residing in Colombia, who may also make their journey to our southwest border. If confirmed, what measures would you take to ensure that the agency is prepared to handle any future influxes of migrants at the border?
Senator, thank you for the question. And I think the issue of preparation is critical. One of the things that I would look forward to doing is building the strongest possible relations with my Mexican counterparts and colleagues so that we could have an ongoing line of communication, allowing Mexico to help play a role in addressing some of those issues along with us, to be able to share intelligence as it becomes available, and to, again, be working at the state and local level, whether it's being more nimble, for example, with soft-sided structures, having adequate personnel available. I'm encouraged that the Border Patrol is bringing on board border protection coordinators. And I think they've brought on about 400 of these at this point, which would make processing of individuals also something much more efficient than what we have now. So there are a lot of steps when it comes to preparation. If confirmed, there's plenty to learn. I would want to dig in by talking to not only the sector chiefs and others in top leadership positions, but also those at the line level, the rank and file.
I appreciate that. One of our challenges, which is probably above your pay grade, if we want to stop the flow of undocumented migrants, you have to deal with root causes, whether that be in Central America or certain instability in Haiti. And unless we do that, we're bound to face continued challenges. In the previous administration, the department made a number of agreements with the government of Mexico and governments throughout Central America. Would you commit to keeping this committee, as well as the committee that I chair, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, informed about bilateral agreements or MOUs related to migration cooperation?
Yes, Senator, I would.
And finally, if one of the jobs you'll have as CBP Commissioner would be to safeguard Americans from the importation of counterfeit products. If confirmed, will you commit to taking concrete steps to strengthen our anti-counterfeit measures? We face this in New Jersey in several different instances. The bridal industry is one where these dresses are made. People on their most significant day in their life maybe buy something that they think is going to be exactly what they saw in their bridal store in New Jersey, and they get it from China, and they find themselves ultimately with a quality that suggested something different, and then it was far different than what they got, and it's too late. And they appear to be the same exact as that which would be purchased domestically. So there's a lot of counterfeiting going on in that regard, and would hope you would make a commitment to strengthening our counterfeit measures.
Senator, thank you for that question. The whole area of e-commerce is something that I am particularly interested in. You're right to remind us that these are dangerous items in many cases, ranging from pharmaceuticals all the way through to flammable mattresses. So e-commerce is an area that I'm very excited delving into further. Obviously, it also involves the theft of intellectual property. We're certainly talking a lot more than just counterfeit, luxury items. These are things that are really potentially dangerous and are a ripoff to the American public.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
The time of my colleague's expired, and he's making an important point. And as the author with Senator McCain of the original Internet tax legislation, look forward very much to working with my friend and colleague, Senator Menendez. Senator Cornyn.
Welcome, Chief. I enjoyed our conversation. It's now been, I guess, a few months ago when you were first nominated. Have you had a chance to review the guidelines for enforcement of civil immigration law that were issued by Secretary Mayorkas on September the 30th?
Senator, thank you for the question. And at this point, I'm still familiarizing myself with some of that information, but want to become very familiar with it if I'm able to move forward.
Were you aware that as a result of these guidelines that the Department of Homeland Security will no longer detain and deport someone who's entered the country illegally if that's their only offense? Were you aware of that?
I have heard some information along those lines, Senator.
Yeah, I think Director Mayorkas was made that statement on television one or more times. Are you familiar with any other area of law enforcement, given your extensive law enforcement career, where the enforcer of the law decides which laws they will enforce?
Well, Senator, actually there is quite a bit of discretion in policing, and there are decisions made frequently based on resources available about which laws will be enforced and how they'll be enforced. This has especially been the case during COVID, when the ability to even put people into jail safely has been greatly
So a police officer or an ICE agent can decide which laws to enforce. It's a matter of their discretion.
There are, Senator, there certainly are circumstances where police officers are trained and, in fact, encouraged to use their good discretion in the manner in which they enforce laws.
Are you familiar with the concept of pull and push factors when it comes to illegal immigration? For example, the push factors of poverty, violence, just people wanting to come to the United States for a better life, but also the pull factors, which include a perception that there will be no consequences associated with illegal immigration. Do you agree with me that the decision by Secretary Mayorkas to no longer detain or deport people who enter the country illegally is a pull factor which encourages more people to make that long, dangerous trip?
Senator, as I think we discussed, I think there are both strong push and pull factors out there. And
I'm just asking about the pull factors now. Would you agree with me that a policy of non-enforcement is a pull factor which is encouraging more illegal immigration?
Senator, thank you for the question. I think that there are many factors that contribute to this.
Is that one of them?
It is certainly one part of it, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And are you familiar, you're a border state police officer and chief, and I know you know a lot about the border, although I will tell you, in my experience with Senator Sinema flying to Tucson, it's a much different situation in the Rio Grande Valley, for example. But one of the things that I think we share in common are the fact that the cartels have figured out how to overwhelm our border security, including our border patrol. And as a result of the fact that unaccompanied children and families and others who require additional processing and care, that when the Border Patrol leave the front lines, in some sectors in Texas, for example, as many as 40% of the Border Patrol have left the front lines of border security and are back processing unaccompanied children, that leaves a 4-lane highway for the drug cartels to smuggle drugs into the United States?
Senator, I agree. Even with the border not being homogenous, I think there's no question, and some areas more than others, such as the Rio Grande Valley, like you described, where we absolutely do need more Border Patrol agents out on the line doing what they were trained to do. And again, this is one of the reasons why I'm encouraged at having border processing coordinators come on board who can relieve some of those agents so they can get back to what should be their primary duties.
It's sort of like the cartels are playing three-dimensional chess while we're playing checkers, because this is part of their business model. And of course, last year alone, more than 90,000 Americans died of drug overdoses. Most of those drugs came across the southern border, as you know. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague. Next is Senator Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Magnus, welcome. Let me just start by asking a question dealing with sanctuary cities. You served 10 years in the California Bay Area next to San Francisco, which is a well-known sanctuary city that flouts U.S. immigration law and refuses to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement agents. If confirmed, you'll oversee the enforcement of immigration law at our borders. Do you support sanctuary cities, and what message do sanctuary cities send to those seeking to enter the United States illegally?
Senator, thank you for the question. As a chief for 2 decades, my first and foremost priority has always been public safety. And so I appreciate how decisions around sanctuary cities are ultimately political decisions. But as a police chief, and certainly in this position were it to be confirmed, my first and primary obligation is to follow the law. That's what I've done always in the past, and that's what I would commit to doing going forward.
Let me follow up on the question that Senator Cornyn raised, and this is similar, I think, in some respects to sanctuary cities, but the Biden administration is circumventing immigration law and issuing these so-called notices to report. And leaked documents show that there are tens of thousands of migrants that have been admitted to the United States with few legal requirements other than to check in with Immigration and Customs Enforcement wherever and whenever they reach their destination in the States. Do you believe that lax enforcement of our immigration laws intensify those pull factors for immigrants, for migrants who are seeking entry into the United States?
Senator, thank you for the question. As we discussed, I think that the issue of notice to appear is something that we want to achieve in any manner we can, certainly by our different agencies working together, by having more asylum officers and immigration judges. This is not a new challenge in many ways. It has been true in multiple administrations, and it's going to take, for the most part, a congressional fix, because we really do have a broken system. And unfortunately, there continue to be very long waits for court dates in order to get people appropriately processed. So until those things can be resolved, I fear that we're going to continue to be in a very difficult situation.
The system is broken. There's no question about that. And I think everybody will acknowledge that. All you have to do is look at the statistics here in the last few months. It's a stunning, it's a staggering, frankly, just disintegration of the border, really, for all intents and purposes. It has been described, an open border, which creates all kinds of bad things. Bad things can happen in this country, but the wrong types of incentives. And this issue of not enforcing immigration laws that already exist, to me, is a major part of that. I understand your suggestion that we need to fix a broken immigration system, but we do have laws on the books that aren't being enforced. And what I'm simply trying to ask you is if you think that those not enforcing or lax enforcement of those immigration laws does intensify that pull factor. I mean, people come here, people respond to incentives. It's that simple. And if the incentives suggest that you can come here illegally and there's no consequence to that, then I think more people are going to come here illegally. Would you not agree with that?
Senator, I agree that enforcing the law is necessary and appropriate. The numbers are high. As a law enforcement official, I, again, will pledge to enforcing the law.
All right. Just very quickly, because my time's about out here, but on this supply chain issue, as you know, they've come under unprecedented strain. And we've got agricultural producers across the country, including in my home state of South Dakota, that continue to harvest their crops and worry that these supply chain constraints could threaten market access for their products. As Commissioner of the CPB, how would you work with the ports and their various stakeholders to improve fluidity and resolve this issue? And perhaps you could quickly touch on how some of these union rules play into that and are helping contribute to these systemic delays.
Senator, could not agree more that the supply chain, especially at the time we're in right now, is critical. And so addressing the movement of goods through the ports in any way possible to expedite that is something that is going to be very important. Obviously, this is going to require working with the port directors. It's going to require close relationships and continued work with groups like COAC and other business groups, both large and small. I don't think there's simple solutions, but if confirmed in this position, CBP is going to continue to work very hard around this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your time's expired.
Time has expired. Senator Cardin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chief Magnus, first of all, thank you for your public service and thank you for your willingness to take on this extremely challenging position. I've listened to your responses to questions in regards to border enforcement, and certainly I agree that we need to enforce our laws. I've also heard your response in regards to the manner in which we enforce our laws. And there are a lot of desperate people who show up at our borders. Many have legitimate claims in entering the United States. We have families that show up on our borders. We have unaccompanied minors that show up on our borders. So I would just like to give you a chance to explain how you would balance enforcement of our laws with the enforcement of our values, which America has been the leader of the world during a time where we have more displaced people than we've had since World War II. So could you just explain to me your own personal philosophy on how you're going to balance the enforcement of our laws with the enforcement of our values?
Senator, thank you very much for that question, because even as we spoke about the numbers being high, there is no question that we have to meet the challenge of asylum obligations as a nation and also the security of our borders. And I think that can be done in a manner that is, yes, absolutely, more efficient. We can do better job with how individuals are processed. But key to this is that it is done humanely. I don't believe that we have to sacrifice efficiency for humanity. And so I think humanity has to be part of the discussion again, early and often throughout the careers of CBP members. This is something we talk a lot about in policing. We do our jobs enforcing the law, but how we engage with the public, even the public that we may be arresting, is what defines us as professionals. And this is something that we have a moral obligation to do.
Thank you for that response. And I also heard you respond to the need for training, which I strongly agree with. A lot of times those funds become difficult. And part is our responsibility to make sure you have adequate resources. But I want to just deal with one of the major challenges that we've had in policing in recent decades, and that is discriminatory profiling. It really turns communities against law enforcement when we use discriminatory profiling. It's inefficient, it's wrong. If you have specific information, obviously the identifiers are important, but to categorize individuals by race or religion or other discriminatory issues is just wrong. I would like to, again, get your view as to how you would proceed with training to make sure that the agency that you lead does not use discriminatory profiling as a method of enforcement.
Senator, thank you for the question, and I could not agree more. Profiling is wrong. This is an area where, yes, training is critical. It has to involve more than just a policy on a page. It has to involve scenario-based training. It has to involve discussions. And then people have to see, as they work their way through their careers, that this is something that's modeled appropriately by their supervisors and others. So I think there are ways to train more effectively that involve including the community in training, making some of these things real, bringing in people who have been profiled and having them share their experiences. These are things that we have done in the departments that I've worked in, and I think we can address this issue.
And lastly, let me just reinforce the comments of the chair and others in regards to border enforcement of our trade laws, whether it's the anti-dumping, countervailing duties, whether it's child labor issues, whether it's intellectual property violations. We need to have a working relationship with the agency as to how we strategize in enforcing our trade laws through border enforcement. And I just really want to underscore the importance of us working together on that to develop a strategy, and I would welcome your recommendations to our committee as to what tools you need to better enforce our trade laws. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Carper, I believe, is online.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Chief Magnus, good morning. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for a lifetime of service, and thank you for your willingness to serve in this important role. Thank you for your patience in waiting for this hearing and the chance to have your nomination debated. Like a lot of my colleagues, I've been trained as a leader since childhood, Boy Scouts, Civil Air Patrol, Navy. And I always said that leadership is the most important ingredient in the success of any entity, large or small, business, private sector. Government is the most important ingredient of all for the success of that organization. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think CBP has lacked a leader, or at least a Senate-confirmed leader, since April 2019. That's like almost 2.5 years. And that said, as you know, CBP is our nation's largest law enforcement agency with over 60,000 employees, if I'm not mistaken. Should you be confirmed, you'll be managing those 60,000 men and women, and your leadership will be central, not only to those in CBP workforce, but to the success of CBP, and frankly, to the department as a whole. And to that end, could you just take a moment to lead us off with sharing how your experience in prior policing roles has shaped your leadership style, prepared you to take on this role? Go ahead, Chief.
Senator, thank you for the question. I have been very fortunate to work in several different police agencies of different sizes in different communities. And one of the things that has been most valuable about that is being able to come in and look at things with a fresh set of eyes, being able to ask the question why, being able to seek out the right people to gain information from, talking to officers at the ground level, building new partnerships in each place that I've worked. These are all things that I think that I would want to bring as a priority if confirmed to this position. I think that I'm a pragmatic person. I like to take a common sense approach to things. And I think when you are willing to continually learn, no matter how much time you have in a field, I like to think of it as intellectual humility. I think it makes for an effective leadership style, and I think it helps you really get some exciting things done.
Yeah, thank you for that response. Second question I'm going to ask you deals with immigration reform, something we've talked about, not done enough about. We've talked about a whole lot here in recent years, but for years I've worked with colleagues on both sides of the aisle in order to try to achieve comprehensive immigration reform. Unfortunately, we still face a number of issues in our immigration system that need to be addressed, as you know. The men and women of CBP are on the front lines each day confronting the challenges created by an immigration system in need of reform. And to that end, what issues do you predict CBP will face given the need to drastically reform our nation's immigration policies and procedures? How will you work with your counterparts to make sure that these challenges are heard and addressed at all levels of the agency?
Senator, thank you for the question. I think it's been particularly difficult to be a CBP agent and certainly a Border Patrol agent in the recent past. I think as laws and policies change, it is necessary to continue to reinforce the idea that professionals, as in policing, enforce the law. And so to the degree that I can help depoliticize this process and build in resiliency as a key for helping our men and women, our hardworking men and women of the Border Patrol, be as effective as possible in their jobs. These are things that I'd like to tackle. I think immigration reform, as you say,
Chief, I'm going to ask you to hold it right there. Chief, I'm going to ask you to hold it right there, and we'll allow you to answer for the record the rest. A real quick question. The Secretary's September 30th border enforcement priorities include recent border crossers. Do they not?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, the Secretary's September 30th border enforcement priorities include, if I'm not mistaken, recent border crossers. Do they not? And can you speak to the folks no longer subject to deportation, please?
I'm sorry, Senator. It's a little difficult to quite make out what you're asking me.
Let me just say it again. The Secretary's September 30th border enforcement priorities include recent border crossers. Do they not? That could be a yes or no. And if you don't know, just say I don't know.
No, I'm not sure. And because I'm having a little trouble understanding the question, I'd like to be able to respond back to you. And
you will be more than welcome to do that. Let me just close by saying I'm delighted to see you sitting before us for this hearing, and we look forward to being able to debate your credentials. I think they're excellent, and to having an opportunity to vote for you on the floor soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Senator Langford is next.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Chief Magnus, thanks for dropping by the office and get a chance to be able to visit yesterday to be able to talk through some things. Let me set context here because I want to ask a larger question, because really the big issue is, what are you going to do? What's the plan? Right now that we're facing this year the highest number of illegal crossing interdictions ever in the history of our country. This year. Now that is after October, November, December, January were low numbers. But mysteriously, starting in February all the way to the present, numbers have skyrocketed. We have triple the number of people each month that are crossing the border illegally now than what we had October, November, December, and January. We have the highest amount of methamphetamines crossing our border in the history of our country. We have the highest number of fentanyl crossing our border in the history of our country. We have, as you described yesterday, what the public hates, chaos on our southern border right now. You have described yourself as not an open borders guy, which I appreciate. The big question that we've got to resolve here, stepping into this role, is you're walking into a chaotic situation where we have the highest number of illegal crossings in the history of our country. What is your plan?
Senator, thank you for the question. And of course, if there was a ready-to-go plan to address all the problems that you've just described, my guess is that not only CBP, but you all as a body would have seen to it that it was implemented. I think that key to answering your question is going to be the importance of collaboration, building relationships. I think it's going to be important that the individuals who are making the policy decisions, which obviously include the Secretary, the President, and others, that they get accurate feedback from me based on what I'm seeing in terms of talking to the men and women at the border, in terms of talking to people in border communities. I think getting that accurate information. And as I pledged to you yesterday, my commitment is to be an honest broker around how this works, is going to be very important in terms of formulating a plan. That's something I want to be part of, is those discussions.
So let me drill down a little bit more on this, and that is, how do you evaluate whether it's successful? Reducing the chaos, is that we move people across the border faster? Because when Secretary Mayorkas was in front of the Homeland Security Committee, his statement was, we're getting much better at the border, we're moving people into the country faster. They're not having to stay as long at the border in these camps. We're getting them across the border faster. So my basic question from a law enforcement perspective is, you're a chief law enforcement officer in this role, leading a lot of law enforcement folks. Is your goal to facilitate faster transition from people crossing the border into our country, or is it to prevent people that are illegally crossing our country from coming into our country?
Senator, thank you for the question. And actually, I think it has to be some of both. We are always going to have some degree of people crossing the border. This has been the case now for years. We've had surges. And so
we've never had a surge like this.
Senator, I understand.
This is the highest number ever in the history of our country.
Senator, I understand your concerns, and I don't disagree with you that the numbers are very high. But the bottom line still remains that, first and foremost, we need to enforce the law. And secondly, we need to have a process that's humane and efficient so we can deal with those who are coming across the border, whether it be to seek asylum or for other purposes. So I think, to some degree, we have to have both.
So what I'm trying to drill down on is a plan in a sense. And I understand there's both at any point, but the role of a law enforcement officer is to enforce the law. We do it humanely. We do it better than anyone else in the world. So for us, we focus on humane treatment of individuals, whether they commit a crime or don't commit a crime. But we also are working in the deterrent method. Right now, it doesn't feel like we're deterring activity. It looks like we're encouraging it. And I would tell you, for the cartel perspective, clearly they're making a tremendous amount of money incentivizing people to be able to come, and we continue to see record numbers month after month after month. So the border has large gaps in the fencing just south of your house. There in Arizona, where literally the administration stopped on January the 20th and left huge gaps in the fence there. The asylum policy is being treated different. The federal courts have now stepped in to DHS and said they need to put back in the migrant protection protocols again. The administration has yet to be able to do that. There's not been a clear way to articulate what's going to happen to asylum, and there seems to be no answer in Title 42. All of those things together have left a border that is very porous, and all I'm trying to figure out is, what is the plan, both with the fencing, how we're going to handle asylum, what's the alternative to Title 42, what we're going to do for individuals that are crossing the border as single individuals, families. It's a multifaceted problem, but there doesn't seem to be a working solution. Even when the federal courts have stepped in and said you have to put in the migrant protection protocols, the administration has yet to do it now.
The time of the gentleman has expired. Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Chair Wyden and Ranking Member Crapo, for this hearing, and thank you, Chief Magnus, for 42 years of service in public safety and for your willingness to serve in this critical role as Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. And thank you as well to your family, because this kind of service is a family effort, so I appreciate their sacrifice too. I want to start with a question on border and immigration enforcement. On September 30th, 2021, Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas issued a memo containing guidelines for border and immigration enforcement. The Secretary's memo provides guidance not only to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, the agency you've been nominated to lead, but also to Immigration and Customs Enforcement and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. In his memo, the Secretary stated that threats to national security, public safety, and border security would be priorities for border and immigration enforcement. Chief, we talked a little bit about this during our one-on-one meeting. Do you agree that individuals charged with serious crimes, not just those with prior convictions, can pose a threat to public safety? And do you agree it's important that DHS personnel have the discretion to detain individuals who are a threat to security or public safety?
Senator, thank you for the question. And no question, if we're looking at this from a public safety standpoint, the answer has to be yes.
Thank you. Now on to an issue of counter-narcotics, part of the very important CBP mission. As we discussed during our private meeting, the substance misuse epidemic is ravaging my state of New Hampshire. It's ravaging your state of Arizona and communities all across the country. U.S. Customs and Border Protection has an important role in disrupting international drug smuggling operations and interdicting the flow of drugs and money across the U.S. border. Transnational criminal organizations are adapting and exploiting predictable procedures at U.S. borders. They use rail transportation, pedestrians, unmanned aerial vehicles, and even submersible vessels to smuggle drugs into the United States. Chief Magnus, as a police chief of a border community, how have you prioritized and fought drug organizations undermining your community? And if confirmed to lead CBP, what would you do to fight international drug trafficking?
Senator, thank you very much for the question. And you're touching on an issue here that is really near and dear to my heart because so many members of our community in Tucson, not to mention across the state and country, have died as a result of opioid overdoses. I think this battle has to be fought on multiple fronts. Yeah. I will tell you, in Tucson, we have a collaborative effort called the Counter-Narcotics Alliance that involves not only state and local partners, but our federal partners as well. And I think this type of collaboration is essential. But I think we also have to use every available means at our ports of entry where we know the great majority of these drugs are coming across to use technology and other resources more effectively to address these drugs. And then there's the area, and I think it was touched on previously, related to e-commerce, where we know that there are many opioids and precursors of such that are coming through these small packages and many times through the Postal Service because of relationships that are complicated involving China. And so this is an area I know where Senator Portman and others have put a good deal of work into the STOP Act. Yep. And CBP plays an important role in enforcing that act. So as I said, there are a whole series of ways in which we can, I think, always do more to address this scourge.
Well, thank you. And I was going to ask you about the importance of new technologies on the border, and you've touched on that. And I just will ask you, please, if you are confirmed, to please let Congress know if there are additional resources or technology that CBP needs to strengthen border security, because I think that's going to be critically important, especially in the counter-narcotics mission.
Thank you, Senator. I will do that.
Okay, thank you. One last topic. CBP has two important missions: securing the U.S. border from dangerous people and goods and facilitating the legitimate flow of commerce and travel. I was pleased that the administration finally heeded my calls and those of others to end the travel restrictions at the Canadian border, which is going to help New Hampshire's economy rebound. The reopening of the Canadian border to vaccinated individuals is an important and long overdue step. Chief, your background in law enforcement, including your time in a border community, makes you well suited for the security mission of CBP. But how familiar are you with CBP's important trade mission, and how will you prioritize and manage that mission?
Senator, thank you for the question. And you're correct, not only in my time growing up in Michigan, but also in the 6.5 years I spent in North Dakota, where where the cross-border traffic to Canada is also essential for a whole host of reasons, causes me to believe that this is going to continue to be very important, even as perhaps the laws and rules change regarding Title 42. So whether it's appropriate staffing to address these issues, other factors that need to be considered, I'm very committed to this cross-border traffic and trade.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hassan, and we're going to be following up with you on those issues. They're incredibly important. Senator Daines is next. I think he's
Chairman,
online.
thank you. Thank you. Chief Magnus, if you are confirmed to this position, you will be at the helm of the largest law enforcement agency in the United States. I've had the opportunity a couple of days.
Challenge, a crisis, we call it a major challenge, a crisis, a big problem. I think
it speaks to a level of urgency and seriousness of purpose and an understanding of the gravity of the situation. I mean, presumably one would answer the call to serve in this position because you understand the importance at this moment in history of being Commissioner of CBP. So do we have a crisis at the border? Yes or no?
Senator, let me assure you that no one believes there is greater urgency to this matter than I do. I have been at the southern border.
So it's urgent. I've heard the characterization urgent strikes the common ear as less than a crisis. Are you saying there's not a crisis at the border?
Senator, I don't think I don't speak to urgent as less serious at all. In fact,
is there a crisis or is there not a crisis at the border?
Senator, I would say that my highest priority is going to...
I didn't ask your priority. I asked to characterize the situation on the border. Is there a crisis at the border? You've been nominated to serve as commissioner to the Customs and Border Patrol agency at a time that I regard as a crisis. Are you saying there is not a crisis?
Senator, what I'm certainly trying to convey is how serious I take what's happening at the border and the amount of work that I want to put into addressing it.
Noted. DHS tells us that we've already seen over 1.3 million illegal border crossings so far this year. That's about 1.5 times the population of Indianapolis, Indiana. I'd say that's a crisis. What number of illegal crossings would you consider to be a crisis? What if we were to quintuple that number? Would you then call it a crisis?
Senator, I appreciate your question, and I'm already doing my best to acknowledge that the situation is very serious. It would be, regardless of what we call it,
okay.
I'll
move on.
It is something important to me.
So, despite the 1.3 million illegal border crossings this year, 100,000 unaccompanied minors, a massive uptick in human trafficking and drug trafficking that's taking a toll in my state and all across the country. Earlier this month, the Department of Homeland Security announced that it will terminate the remaining contracts for the southern border wall in the Rio Grande Valley. Now, look, I'm looking for a series of yes or no answers from you, sir. Do you believe that canceling such contracts at this time is a prudent choice given the dire situation on our southern border, yes or no?
Senator, I'm not working for CBP right now, so I don't even know exactly which contracts we're referring to. In
preparing for this hearing, you didn't familiarize yourself with that, sir?
I'm sorry, Senator, but I can't tell you I'm familiar with each contract that the Border Patrol has for infrastructure. What I will tell you, sir, is that I think there is a place for infrastructure, and I think that includes, in certain sections, completion of barriers, wall, other things. So this is an area that I want to learn more about. It's going to.
Do you think there is a role? Would you commit to reinstating the contracts once you become commissioner? Should you be confirmed?
Senator, I can't commit to reinstating a specific contract that I'm not familiar with.
Because you haven't familiarized yourself with that. Have you familiarized yourself with Title 8, U.S. Code Section 1325, sir?
I'm sorry, Senator, I'm not familiar.
This is the operative federal law that makes it a crime for an individual to enter or attempt to enter the United States at any point other than a border inspection point or other official point of entry. So this is what would basically dictate the laws that you're enforcing and your actions as commissioner. So are you familiar with that law, sir?
Sir, my primary responsibility as a police chief has been to be as familiar as possible with all of the laws that we're responsible for enforcing. So I can assure you that if I'm confirmed for this position, I will do the same. I'll become as familiar with.
All right, sir.
laws.
You're the nominee to be the commissioner of CBP, and you have not familiarized yourself with the operative immigration law. I see that as being a concern. Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. We'll go to Senator Daines next. And I'm going to just tell colleagues we're going to do our best to wrap up before the vote. So, colleagues, just be on notice. Senator Daines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Magnus, if confirmed in this position, you'll be at the helm of the largest law enforcement agency of the United States. I've had the opportunity in a couple of different times to visit the border. I've seen firsthand the heroic efforts our brave men and women put forth each and every day to protect our borders and our country. Unfortunately, the Biden administration's disastrous border policies have led to a massive surge in illegal immigrants that have overwhelmed our Border Patrol officers. It's quite enlightening to spend time quietly with these officers and to hear firsthand what they see day in and day out. In fact, just this calendar year, there have been more than 1.3 million encounters at the southern border due to ending the successful policies of the Trump administration, such as Remain in Mexico, as well as ending catch and release. The migrant crisis has left portions of the border more vulnerable to an influx of illicit drugs that the Mexican cartels produce, like meth, fentanyl, heroin, and sadly, it's making its way to Montana and ravaging many of our Montana communities. The administration's public threats of retaliation against Border Patrol officers over this viral horseback whipping, this hoax has undermined the confidence that those in positions of leadership will have their backs. Chief Magnus, I appreciate your long career in law enforcement in places like North Dakota as well as in Arizona, but I must say for this position I have serious concerns with the nomination. One thing we know for certain is that the policies enacted under President Trump were successful at stemming the flow of illegal migrants to our borders. Policies which, I must add, were overwhelmingly supported by the men and the women on the ground. You were publicly critical of the Trump administration policies, notably the efforts to crack down on sanctuary cities. Chief Magnus, as you look at the crisis we're seeing now at the southern border, wouldn't you agree that the Biden administration is failing and that we should take a step back and relook at some of the common sense measures that were working during the previous administration?
Senator, thank you for the question. And as I indicated before, I am pragmatic and common sense focused, which means I'm willing to talk to anybody and everybody related to this situation and to relay as best I can that information to policymakers. I do appreciate the opportunity to clarify, since my first priority as a chief throughout my career has been around public safety, that my advocacy that you're referring to in an op-ed was never political. It was a recognition that every community deserves to receive burn grant funding. This is critical funding that helps communities with their crime-fighting efforts. And regardless of what any elected body might decide to deem their city as being, I don't believe that the residents of that community should suffer because they lack the resources that are necessary for the police to be able to do their job. So my criticism was simply that any city should be able to have these resources so that the local residents don't suffer. And I think that would be consistent with just about every police chief that I know.
Well, if there's a place I would agree with you in that statement is to not politicize these very important issues facing the security of our nation. One area that's been very politicized, I think, by the Biden administration is the efforts to build the wall and secure the southern border. And I can't tell you how many Border Patrol agents I've spoken with face-to-face that's saying that was an effective way to help them secure the southern border. So do you believe we should continue and to finish building the wall that was started?
Senator, I've also, I appreciate the question. I've also had the opportunity to speak to a number of Border Patrol agents and folks on the ground about this. And the agents that I've spoken to, yes, as you say, there are some areas of the border that they think additional barrier or wall could be useful. I'm not taking issue with that. But they also talk about the need for better technology, better basic resources related to their ability to communicate by radio and by phone.
Right.
There are
so you're saying there's place you would agree we should continue to build the wall then?
I think there are some gaps where that could make sense.
Okay.
But
the time left, thank you for that answer. Recent reports have shown that tens of thousands, perhaps over 100,000 migrants have been released into the interior through catch and release. Do you support catch and release, and do you think it's an effective system?
Senator, I appreciate the question, and the challenge, of course, is we are dealing with a fundamentally broken system. That it did not just become broken; it has been broken for many years, and in particular, over the last 4+ years, we've been challenged with not enough asylum officers, not enough immigration judges, long waits for court dates. And these things, they take a toll. This has been true in multiple administrations, so it's going to require Congress to make a fix in this area. And I am very interested in working with the members of Congress. I'd like to work with you and others to see how we can best assure that the process works the way it's supposed to.
All right. Thank you. I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman.
Time of gentleman's expired. Next is Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Chief Magnus, for being here today. It's good to be able to speak with you again. I am very encouraged by your experience in law enforcement and your extensive experience with immigration issues. But I think anyone filling the post of CBP Commissioner is going to have a very challenging job. One recent and very high-profile example of these challenges has been the treatment of Haitian immigrants in Del Rio, Texas. Border Patrol agents who are CBP personnel engaged in cruel and disturbing behavior against these migrants. Inhumane treatment of migrants and asylum seekers is unacceptable in our nation. I know DHS has opened an investigation into these interactions. So here's the commitment I'd like from you. Will you push for transparency in that investigation and for public release of all your findings?
Senator, thank you for the question, and I think you will find that I have a long history of transparency and sharing things with the public, whatever the outcome may be, because I think this is how you sustain and build trust. I agree. The images that we saw were troubling. I am grateful that the Secretary opened an investigation. I think it's very important that we be fair and allow the investigation to move in whatever direction it does as facts are gathered, so I'm not going to prejudge, but I think we can safely say that examining tactics and training is certainly appropriate, and is, after a significant incident, is something that I have a long history of working towards.
Well, and I very much appreciate that history. That's why I'm here today. But I'm asking actually for a commitment, and that is that you will push for transparency in this investigation and for the public release of all the findings.
Senator, I certainly commit that I will push
Good.
for that.
That's what I wanted to hear. Now, I know that in response to the negative publicity about what happened at Del Rio, there was a temporary end to the Border Patrol's use of horseback units in the area. But I see this as just a symptom of a broader problem in recent years. Will you make it a top priority to ensure that all CBP personnel treat migrants and asylum seekers with the dignity as human beings that they deserve and with proper respect for all of their legal rights, including the legal right to seek asylum?
Senator, thank you for that question. And as I've spoken to, I believe that we have asylum obligations as a nation. And therefore, even as we seek efficiency and to be as effective as possible in working with individuals who seek asylum, we can never bypass the criticality of treating people humanely. Right. These are fellow human beings, and they have to be treated humanely.
Good. I appreciate that, and we will work together on that because I'm going to hold you to that.
Thank you, Senator.
Another concern I have is about the effects of the COVID pandemic at immigration detention facilities. As you know, I've been pushing for greater transparency about COVID cases in these facilities, and Congressman Castro and I introduced a bill to help ensure accurate and complete data collection regarding COVID testing, vaccination, and safety protocols at CBP facilities and other immigration detention facilities. Also last month, the DHS Inspector General released a report that found that CBP does not conduct COVID testing for migrants who enter its custody. The Inspector General recommended that DHS reassess its COVID response framework, and DHS agreed with this recommendation. With that in mind, will you prioritize working with other federal agencies to ensure accurate and complete data transparency regarding COVID-19 in CBP facilities?
Senator, thank you for the question. And, without good data collection, I think we're really not in a great position, right? So I support data collection. I support being transparent with that data. Particularly as it relates to COVID, I think this is critical.
Good. And will you commit to keeping Congress informed about your findings?
Senator, I absolutely will.
Good. The CBP commissioner has an obligation to ensure the health and well-being of individuals in its care and custody. Congress and the public have a right to know what is happening, so I appreciate your commitment to making that a priority. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My colleagues expired. We'll go now to Senator Cassidy, then we'll go to Senator Bennett, and then I think Senator Scott is also going to be available. Senator Cassidy.
Hey, Chief, thank you. I enjoyed our phone conversation. I know there's been a discussion of this recently, earlier, but tell me, as regards immunization, why are we not requiring those who are being allowed to come into the United States to be vaccinated for COVID before being released into the United States, particularly in the context that the Biden administration is asking anyone that has a nexus with federal government to require their employees to get vaccinated? I'm not quite sure I understand the exception for those who are being allowed to come here illegally.
Senator, thank you for the question. And actually, I think any of those individuals, migrants coming into the country, should be immunized.
Thank you. And should be required to be immunized as a condition of being allowed to continue?
Senator, that's something I definitely want to explore. It seems reasonable to me.
Okay. A couple other issues. Your law enforcement background is without parallel. Let me ask, though, on the other issues. For example, we discussed Jones Act. CBP has jurisdiction over Jones Act, trade-based money laundering. What will you do, if you will, for those areas that, if you will, are kind of gaps in your background, but nonetheless an important portion of the CBP mission?
Senator, thank you for the question. I have to tell you, I know that perhaps the assumption has been made that I would be more interested in the border and those functions as opposed to the trade functions of CBP. But I want to assure you the trade functions are an area where I'm both extremely interested and want to commit to learning as much as possible. The Jones Act, I'm sure you realize better than most, is incredibly complex. I am doing my best to learn about it.
Now, can I ask, because inevitably you'll need a lieutenant who is going to be in charge of that, just because, I mean, your plate will be full just with the border. So do you have the ability to hire your own lieutenants, or will there be someone there who will make this a priority within the considerations of the department? Knowing that you're making an effort to learn, but knowing that the highly technical aspect of it will require somebody with expertise.
Senator, thank you for the question. And one of the great things about the process that I've gone through over the last several months is to learn about the number of highly knowledgeable, highly dedicated personnel.
I'm taking that as a yes.
Grade. So you are 100% right. Yes.
In your testimony, you had a paragraph regarding the desire to address the issue of forced labor. Now, of course, I would advocate that that be second and third degree. There's been a big push in this committee to support battery technology. It's pretty clear that cobalt is being taken out of the Congo using forced labor, which is being employed, if you will, by Chinese companies. It's been pretty well documented. There's a New Yorker article about it. There's others in the press. I had promoted an amendment that was rejected on party lines that if we would ask that cobalt being used in batteries be ensured not to come from forced labor. To what degree does your commitment to addressing the use of forced labor include the kind of second degree? It isn't where the battery is being made, but it is where the cobalt is being mined to be used in the battery.
Senator, thank you for the commitment, and I would just mention that forced labor is really something I'd like to consider as a top trade priority.
But that would be a second degree issue as well, not just China where it's being used with the Uyghurs, but also in Congo where it's being used to harvest the cobalt?
Absolutely.
And to put a point on it, it would bring you a little bit in conflict with the emphasis on other parts of the administration to use battery technology, which requires the use of this forced labor mined cobalt. Are you willing to take on that political battle?
Senator, it would certainly be something I'd want to learn more about, obviously, because right now...
Yes, but if you, and I don't mean to interrupt, I just have 40 seconds left. If you're going to take on forced labor, I can tell you it's hard with the emphasis upon battery technology to take it on, because there is just a lot of folks who want to put head in sand and not notice about child labor being in the Congo, being used by Chinese companies to take the cobalt to be making these batteries. So simple answer. You may decide that, no, you don't want to engage in it, but if it turns out what I'm saying is correct, will you take that issue on?
Yes, I will. It sounds like a very important situation. I'm very...
Thank you, and I'll yield back. I just say that. I thank you for your testimony.
I thank my colleagues. So now we'll go to Senator Bennett, and then we'll go to Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. And Chief Magnus, thank you for being here and for your willingness to serve in an extraordinarily difficult position. As we discussed in our phone call together, I remain deeply concerned about unaccompanied children crossing the border, the high number of children crossing, and their treatment once they're in custody of the United States. It's not a secret that the previous administration did almost everything in its power to dismantle the legal immigration system. In our legal services, educational programs, and recreation activities for kids in the government's custody, hundreds of kids were separated from their parents under President Trump's policies and were never reunified, a humanitarian catastrophe. It was heartless and it was heartbreaking to have babies and infants spend weeks in under-resourced detention centers that were not appropriate for anyone, much less children. Much was done to deter children from coming, but it didn't work. By May 2019, there were almost over 11,800 children apprehended by CPB. The courts had to step in to stop the previous administration from just summarily expelling these kids. And when President Biden was sworn in, he immediately took executive action and revoked President Trump's enforcement priorities. He also took further action to reunify families and care for the unaccompanied children over the following months. However, in the first 8 months of 2021, over 118,000 unaccompanied children were apprehended, and I continue to hear horror stories about their treatment both in CBP custody and beyond. There are currently still over 11,000 children in the government's custody, with just under 500 at CPB. I recognize that this is an incredibly hard issue and that the numbers are slowly declining, but I've not seen any plan or any request from the administration outlining their strategy on this. Should you be confirmed, will you commit to work with Secretary Mayorkas on creating a plan that specifically supports unaccompanied children in CPB custody?
Senator, thank you for the question. And there are a few things more important to me than how we treat children. This is something that I have carried with me throughout my career. So the answer is absolutely yes.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. Will you commit to immediately investigating any instance of physical, sexual, or other types of abuse that is reported from CPB employees or contractors?
Yes, Senator.
And will you commit to providing information on investigations to my office and others who may be conducting oversight for the purposes of protecting these children?
Senator, the answer is yes.
Thank you, Chief. Shifting gears, Chief Magnus, in 2020, drug overdose deaths increased in Colorado by 38% over the previous year, the largest year-over-year increase since at least 2000. This increase was worse than the U.S. average. The highest rates of death due to overdose were in 3 counties in southern rural Colorado. And the overdose and overall mental health epidemic have only gotten worse over the past year, and we need to work at every level to address it. At the northern and southern borders, fentanyl seizures remain high, and this substance is finding its way into communities and destroying them. How are you planning to address the trafficking of drugs across the northern and southern border to help prevent these deaths, and what types of technology or resources do you think are needed to better screen at ports of entry where these products are coming through?
Senator, thank you for the question. The scourge of fentanyl, of opioids in general that are coming across both borders is both alarming and deeply troubling. We continue to see the majority of this drug come through the ports of entry. And so the technology that continues to be developed, some which is coming through the CBP's Invent Office, others of which there's been some examples of this, I think, being piloted, is something I'm very excited about learning more about. Obviously, the challenge is I'm not in the agency at this time, so I don't know the inner workings of what those technology opportunities are exactly, but something that I want to learn about because I think this is such a high priority. And I realize it is coming through both borders. So I think there is a great deal more we could do, and I would like to work with you and others on this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bennett, before you leave, let me just say how much I appreciate all the leadership you've given, not just today, but throughout this Congress to protect vulnerable children. And I want you to know, as long as I'm chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, I'm going to be backing you up on these issues.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. That means a lot.
Okay, Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Magnus, thank you for being here. I had a few questions for you, but Senator Bennett's questions have answered at least one of my questions, which was whether or not you were unwilling to answer yes or no questions, or whether or not you were just selective in answering yes or no questions. I've come to the conclusion that you're just very selective on the questions that you're going to answer yes or no to, because both Senator Young and Senator Bennett asked very easy questions to say yes or no to. You struggled to come to the conclusion that there is a crisis on our border, which I found fascinating. Millions of Americans, literally millions upon millions of Americans, have come to the same conclusion that I have and that Senator Young has, and that, frankly, I think even the administration is now coming to the same conclusion, that there is a crisis on our southern border. When we have 200,000 folks illegally crossing our border in just July, more than 1 million in the last fiscal year, there is a crisis on our border. Why admitting that there is a crisis on our border is a problem, I don't fully appreciate. When under the administration, finally, after demonizing every single action of the Trump administration as it relates to the border, it is apparent to me that when the Department of Homeland Security reinstates the Remain in Mexico policy, it is because there is a crisis at the southern border. So I'm going to ask you, Mr. Magnus, just for clarification. With the reinstatement of the policy, with 1 million plus people crossing our border, with more than 200,000 just in July, with the actions taken against the border agents, is there a crisis at our border?
Senator, thank you for the question. But if I might just make the observation that perhaps as a nation and as a group of even electeds, if we spent a little less time debating on what the terminology is and perhaps a little more time trying to fix a broken system and working together, we could address what I've already acknowledged is one of the most serious problems that we face right now in our nation.
Well, Mr. Magnus, this is frankly where both Republicans and Democrats come to the same conclusion, that there is a crisis at our border. This is the one area of many areas within the political spectrum that we'd like to see some kind of uniformity and people working together and acknowledging the concerns that we have. But words have meaning. We are living in a time where we're trying to find a way to erase and then redefine words. But the fact that there's a crisis, there's just a crisis. Number one. Number two, when Rodney Scott, the former chief of the Border Patrol, who worked for both President Trump and President Biden, says that the administration is abusing its authority as it relates to paroles, I'll ask you, with over 30,000 released via parole, and so many hundreds of thousands more just released into our communities, do you believe that the administration is abusing their immigration authority?
Senator, I appreciate the question. And obviously, this issue of immigration authority, how it's being used, is something that would be very important to me if confirmed for this position. I'm coming into this, obviously, as someone from the outside. My intention would be to learn as much as I can, talk to different parties involved who maybe have very different perspectives on this, learn what I can, and then share that information with those above me.
Let me just say it this way. When our American public is watching the reckless action in Afghanistan, where we are trying to figure out what the vetting process was for those folks arriving here, and we are thankful that those who assisted our soldiers in Afghanistan, we want to have the folks who deserve to be here from Afghanistan, and yet the vetting process was rushed because of the arbitrary nature of the departure. That creates one concern from an immigration standpoint. This exacerbates the situation when you add on top of those concerns for the average American seeing more than 1 million folks come into our country illegally, which is about 20% of all of the citizens in the great state of South Carolina. So you can imagine my concerns that are shared by millions of Americans around this country as it relates to what we're doing on our border and what we're not doing on our border is very concerning. Thank you.
I thank my colleague. I believe Senator Cortez Masto is on the web. Senator, are you out there?
Chairman, I am. Can you hear me?
Very good.
Wonderful. Thank you. So Chief Magnus, thank you for the conversation earlier and your willingness, let me just say, to serve. I know the fundamental role of U.S. Customs and Border Protection plays in securing our nation's borders. And believe me, I have traveled to the southern border multiple times, not only as a senator here representing the state of Nevada, but as the Attorney General for the state of Nevada, to see not only the firsthand challenges that Border Patrol agents face, but also to address what there has been conversation this morning on, which is transnational criminal enterprises that continue to engage in drug trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering, and weapons trafficking across the border. And let's be clear, when we talk about borders, my understanding is my colleagues, everybody's talking about the southern border only. And so let me ask you this, because isn't it true that these multinational corporations, these criminal enterprises that we have been trying to address, have been really engaging in this criminal conduct, illicit narcotics trafficking, money laundering, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, really now for decades. Isn't that correct? Particularly out of Mexico.
Senator, I think based on what I've learned so far, I would share your concerns about this. And I am pleased that what I've also learned is how closely CBP is working with ICE and others to target these criminal networks. If I'm confirmed for this position, this would be something very important to me because I understand the impact that this has on the supply chain and many other things. So, yes,
And thank you. No, I appreciate that because it requires this collective effort of state, local, federal, and our partners in other countries as well to address this because it is a challenge and we need to actually have strong border security. But let me ask you this, when it comes to our border security, what resources and technology does CBP need to improve that infrastructure, particularly for our ports of entry? I know you're not there yet. Do you have any idea or have you looked at this yet?
Well, Senator, I appreciate the question because, as I've come to learn so far, and again, admittedly looking at this from an outsider's perspective, the border security has to be addressed through a combination of things. I think technology is a very important piece, and the use of unmanned aerial surveillance of different types, various sensors that can help us see into Mexico to figure out what may be coming our way, technology that allows our Border Patrol officers to communicate more effectively with each other in difficult terrain or across longer distances. I think these are some of the technology pieces, but as I previously mentioned, I also understand the need to address other infrastructure concerns where it makes common sense to do so, as well as to address probably the most important resource that we have, which is our people, making sure they're getting the training, the support that they need to do their jobs.
Thank you, and I agree with you. Let me put something on your radar. In 2019, I had the opportunity to visit a joint intelligence and operations center located in Tucson, Arizona, run by the CBP. This center acted as a fusion center style for many different law enforcement agencies to coordinate operations and communications. I visited it, but my understanding, though, it has since closed, and I'm trying to find out why. This is a perfect example of where you have this collaboration at all levels of government, really to focus on the needs there at the border. So my question for you is, if confirmed, will you commit to working with me to get me the answers? I'm still waiting for on why this center was located in Tucson was closed, because I think it was a perfect example of how this collaboration should continue forward.
Senator, thank you for the question, and I'll certainly commit to providing you with more information. I can give you the good news, which is there is an unusually high level of collaboration between state, federal, and local partners around many of the issues we've discussed that's going on both in Tucson and throughout Arizona.
Thank you. Thank you again for your willingness to serve.
Thank my colleague, and particularly her focus on how the spies and criminals are taking advantage of some of the holes in the process of enforcement. And we're going to really zero in on e-passport forgery and have talked about that. Senator Portman, I believe, will be our final questioner. Senator Portman, you out there?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Chief, appreciate your testimony today. I got to hear some of it off and on with other commitments, and I also appreciated our conversation, which was very frank, about some of the challenges we're facing on the border today. The crisis at the border continues to, in my view, be based on policy decisions that we are making or need to make, and the big one for me is the pull factor of the asylum system. And you and I talked about this at some length. I just would like to hear from you a little about your perspective on this. We recently saw the surge in Del Rio, but the overall numbers just continue to increase. And for the traffickers and the human smugglers who are exploiting people, unfortunately, they have a narrative, which is that if you come up to the border with us, pay us $10,000 or whatever it is, then we'll get you into the United States. Just claim asylum and you'll be allowed in for a period of time with a 1.2 million person backlog at least, and with 4 to 5, maybe 6 years before a hearing. And with the acceptance rate being about 15% for folks from the so-called Northern Triangle countries, and probably similar with regard to Ecuador and other countries that are increasing their numbers, the system is clearly broken. Could you speak to that and what you think about our current asylum system, if confirmed, how it would make your job harder and what you think ought to be done about it?
Senator Portman, thank you for the question, and also thank you for the conversation we were able to have about some of these things. We are certainly aligned around the challenges associated with the pull factors. I mean, there's no question there are both pull and pull factors that are bringing migrants to this country and asylum seekers, but the pull factors are very evident, and I think there is no one simple solution to this. Obviously, the message is going to have to be clear that we intend to follow the law. We're going to have to do more clear messaging, and that include at every level of government, and that includes effective, even social media messaging. We're going to have to do more to anticipate surges and work with the Mexican government around that. I am, as I've mentioned, very interested and open to working with my counterparts in Mexico and building the strongest possible relations there. So, again, no one easy answer to this, but I agree this is part of the challenge.
Yeah, I guess just quickly, Chief, are you also willing to work with those of us who believe that the asylum system is broken? And I think you're one of them from our conversations, to come up with a system that makes more sense. As an example, having people apply for asylum from their home country, having an immediate adjudication, allowing for the system to work as it was intended.
Senator, I'm very interested in working with you and others. I agree that the asylum system absolutely must be improved. As I've tried to reinforce several times, I think this requires a bipartisan approach. It requires listening, compromising, sharing. I am very open to doing all of those things, including, frankly, a number of conversations with the men and women at the ground level who are dealing with some of these challenges on a day-to-day basis and often have some very strong ideas and well-thought ideas about how things could be made better. So, yes, you have my commitment for that.
Well, I appreciate that commitment, and I look forward to working with you should you be confirmed on that issue. Another issue you and I talked about is the security along the border and the fact that of the roughly 450 miles of fencing that was built by the previous administration, sometimes called the wall, only about 10% of the technology was put in place prior to the Biden administration coming into office and calling a pause on all construction. You and I talked about the situation along the border. Certainly you've seen it in Arizona. I was in Del Rio not long ago looking at the gaps in the border wall, which are, to me, obvious things that should be closed and create a huge problem for the Border Patrol. But the one that particularly troubles me is the fact that even though Democrats and Republicans alike talk about the need for sensors and cameras and more sophisticated technology, that again, only about 10% of that was completed, which complements the fence. Would you be supportive of completing the technology part of this? I won't let you, I won't put you on the spot in terms of the so-called wall. I believe that fencing ought to be completed as well. I think it's, it's nonsensical that we paid the contractors to do this and Border Patrol have to stand there 24/7 in order to protect a gap in the wall. But let's move on to the technology issue where I think there's more consensus. Would you be willing to say today that you would support completing the technology, again, sensors, cameras, to be able to give your Border Patrol officers the opportunity to be able to respond more effectively and more efficiently?
Senator, thank you for the question. And You're correct. I'm interested in providing the agents of the Border Patrol with the best possible resources, which would include improvements in technology, something I'm very interested in learning more about, especially because the border's not homogeneous and there are different needs along different sections.
Time of the gentleman's expired.
Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Brown.
Thank you, Senator Wyden, and I'm pleased to be able to go right after my colleague from Ohio, whose name I invoked a number of times last week about the infrastructure work we've done together, especially in Buy America. Chief Magnus, congratulations on your nomination. As Chairman Wyden mentioned, this post is critical for addressing issues that the chair and I have worked on. As Ranking Member Crapo had mentioned in his words late earlier, this post is critical to enforce circumvention of our trade remedy laws. We need you to take this post as quickly as possible. My commitment to the chair and to you is certainly that. I hear from businesses across Ohio encountering issues with dumping of Chinese-sourced product into the U.S. market. We know China has historically used every tool at its disposal to get around our trade laws. That's why I've introduced my bipartisan bill with Senators Portman and Rubio and Casey, a member of this committee, the Level the Playing Field 2.0 to update trade remedy laws. But to really address these issues, we need the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection to make this issue a priority. There are a couple of trade enforcement issues I want to flag. The first on transshipment, the second on circumvention, issues you know well. An Ohio company explained to us that they're seeing increased shipments of products sourced from China, but with port of entry that says South Korea. In other words, the shipment will originate in China, make a stop in another country. It doesn't get the proper review when it arrives on our shores. Another company explained to us that despite our 232 tariffs covering electrical steel, China gets around it by creating products used for electric grid transformers and moving that product through Mexico and Canada. China has a playbook. They build up overcapacity in a specific product. They then target American businesses for illegal dumping in our market. They've done this for steel and iron. They make it so that small businesses can't compete, and they're about to do it for materials that are sensitive for our national security. Without proper enforcement of trade laws, we put our industries and jobs at risk. So I have sorry for the long intro. I have two questions. Talk about, if you will, how you'll take the interests of American workers into account in this job, committing today to putting workers, not just businesses, not just products, but workers as a priority in trade enforcement.
Senator, thank you very much for the question, because there is no doubt that what happens in these cases, as you've described, with transshipments, with the abuse of various trade agreements, with the whole anti-dumping, countervailing duties situation, that it is not just American business, but American workers who are really operating on a very unequal playing field. And so, whether we're talking about ranges from wire hangers to solar panels, these are very real concerns, and I look forward to learning more about how the trade personnel within CBP are addressing these challenges, so I can support them, so I can be an advocate for them, so I can work with the business community, both large and small. The goal is not only to facilitate business, but to be as transparent as possible about what's going on so we can address these challenges.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will, every time you and I interact personally and by mail or online, I will always bring up the importance of workers to keep that focus in your job. Will you commit, this is a pretty simple yes or no, will you commit to working with us to make sure that leveling the playing field 2.0 is a priority with the administration?
I believe it has to be a priority, Senator.
Thank you.
Yes.
Last questions about immigration. We're seeing, as you know, a dramatic increase of unaccompanied children arriving at the border. It's imperative that who we are as a nation, who we should be as a nation, that children are safe and protected while they're in our care. We must ensure agents have the necessary training to process children awaiting to be placed with HHS. Social workers can play a role in supporting agents and their children in their care. I assume you agree with that?
I do.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your...
I thank my colleague. Before he leaves, I want to commend him again for all his leadership on the forced labor issue. And we've been talking to Chief Magnus about it, and he's going to work very closely with us. So I look forward to all that you have done. So we've got a couple of formalities. We want to thank all the members for their participation. We had a very, very high turnout today. Chief Magnus, thank you for your candid responses regarding questions for the record. The deadline for members to submit their questions will be Sunday, October 24th at 5, with the expectation that members will submit them by close of business Friday, if possible. We really want to move this. This is a very important nomination, and the 5 p.m. deadline for colleagues is firm. Let me just wrap up with a couple of quick thoughts, Chief Magnus. Colleagues on both sides of the aisle have raised critical issues, and particularly humanely addressing immigration on the southern border while we tackle relentlessly illegal drugs, and we facilitate legal trade, and we investigate and stop goods that are made with forced labor. So we've had a lot of important issues. Senator Cardin made a point which I think was perhaps more eloquent than how I tried to describe it, where he said, we don't have to sacrifice efficiency for humanity with respect to your portfolio. That sums it up. You've got important work to do. I expect that you'll have colleagues on both sides of the aisle supporting you before we're done because of your candor, because of your professionalism. I strongly support you. I supported you before this morning, and you've given us additional reason to support you. We'll excuse you at this time, and the Finance Committee is adjourned.